Hey everyone, and welcome to the first of two weekly news recaps. Today we've got a lot of stuff to get into. Some of it's good news, some of it's bad, but it's all worth talking about. Of course, we're going to be doing a lot more than just weekly recaps though. We've got individual topic reports set to release throughout the week, as well as very soon my updated Destiny 2 thoughts, which will come out tomorrow. So be on the lookout for that. And let's get into it. And we're going to kick off today's news coverage with something that's actually nice. Titanfall 2 seems to be making a comeback, which is kind of wild. If you want to play a game where the Mozambique is a little bit less trash, then yeah, Titanfall 2 pretty much is the game for you. Now, most of us at the time thought that Titanfall 2's underperformance kind of spelled the end of the franchise. Well, of course, with Apex, along with Origin Store promotions, well, we've seen a bit of a reversal. The game's player base is actually experiencing a revival. Finding games is actually very possible now, and that's something I can confirm from my own testing. We'll have to see if it lasts, but it's nice to see that Apex Legends, which is of course set in the Titanfall universe, has led to this greatly underappreciated title getting the recognition that it deserves. And Titanfall 2 really is a wonderful game. It's very hardcore, and as the developers themselves have kind of admitted, it's not always that easy to get into, and it's not really full of teachable moments, but overall, I had a lot of fun during launch, and I'm so glad that it's doing well again. So when we do this by the numbers across all platforms, the player base has at least doubled. Far more than that in some cases, actually, with the cross-platform player count seemingly ranging between 7,000 and 20,000 players. Now, this is a comeback that I also think is probably quite a bit helped by the fact that the game did not have player-base dividing DLC, so it could be that their player-friendly DLC practices actually ended up helping them in the end. It'll certainly be interesting to see if EA decide to allow Respawn to throw a few more maps at this game over the coming year, because if they did, this could only just be the beginning of a revival. So now that we've got the good news covered, it's time to talk about something that honestly is extremely serious: video game violence and censorship. First up, we've got the Scots. Their leader, Nicholas Sturgeon, is advocating for further regulation of video game content. Unlike the loot box situation, this is actually content, and this is really serious. It can be really explained by the incentives that are faced by politicians, the incentives that often lead them towards such weasel-like behavior. So, look, we all remember that game from Steam last week, right? The one that they removed from the platform. Well, here's what Nicholas Sturgeon had to say about it in Parliament. Violence against women, whether it is sexual or of any other form, is not a game and should never be treated that way. It is serious and must be treated that way, so I hope the game is not promoted. In my view, the matter should not be down to the individual decisions of companies. It is time for regulations governing the area to be reviewed. Perhaps the whole Parliament can unite on the issue and call on the UK government to do so without delay. As you can see in the end, she is supporting the government having further control over the content of games. And I think we can all agree that the subject matter of this game is not something that should be off limits. Nicholas says it's not a game. Well, does that also mean it's not a damn book? After all, every other form of media, that's something that you can talk about in. Here's a great example. There are uncomfortable books like The Color Purple that are a part of many people's education. The problem here is that we're giving the government, or we would be if she gets what she wants, we'd be giving the government that power, and if ceded, it's not going to be given back. Given the nature of the United Kingdom government on issues of censorship as of late, and what seems to be the slow death of, well, speech in this country, this really is another very bad sign. Here's the thing, reasoning with the likes of Sturgeon isn't really going to work here, because for the like of her, this is simply another topical thing to be loud about, something that can be used to get support from the, in terms of domain-specific knowledge, uneducated masses who don't know about the context of this being a tiny game in Steam that led to online coverage beyond its level of importance. This is the sort of thing that a politician will say so that your dad or your aunt or your mum will hear about it on the television. Thing is, it is exactly the sort of thing that leads to a decrease in human culture over time. The people who live 100 years in the future will feel the cascading effect of every little thing we let them get away with, because it all snowballs and compounds. Quite simply, all we can do is reject censorship in every place that we find it. It's usually a bad thing. In reality, this was a tiny game that sparked off a massive outrage, seemingly from people who thought that outrage would be useful. After all, just about anybody who actually covers the game industry in any form of detail knows what's going on outside of Steam and knows that this is not a special case. So to those championing video game regulation, as has become so popular online, be very careful what you wish for, because you might just get it. It does not end with her though, because the Labour Party's Diane Abbott has claimed that video games are partially to blame for violent crime. Now, it is important to say that she was clear in that she doesn't think it was the main cause, but she did say that she thinks it desensitizes people to violence. Well, as we're going to cover very soon in this video, that's not really the case. And I think it shows that really, both sides are censorious. We see the left do this, we see the right do this. What's the takeaway? Well, guess what? We can't really trust either of them. And this is happening at a time where the people who govern our countries have very little connection to the lives led by young people. Either way, it doesn't bode well for video games and for media, which is, an important form of expression. The UK are already pretty darn creepy with how they go after people for tweets, and here's the thing, if Labour gets the next election, as an example, Diane Abbott will likely be Home Secretary. And that actually means that her thoughts here could lead to action and legislation, and that probably wouldn't be great for games. Now, I'm not saying that the particular game that tackled this stuff is extremely important. I'm not saying that it was trying to tackle that issue. What I am saying, though, is take The Last of Us 2. Or, well, The Last of Us, actually. Good example. That's an example of that being tackled, I would imagine, pretty well, based off the people who I've, talked to. It should not, that should not be banned as a thing to have in a game just because of what it is, in the same way that we don't go around burning copies of The Color Purple, which again I use because in English literature classes for teenagers, that is a very common book for study. It's very worrying overall, and as much as sometimes a show like this is about, oh, what has Anthem done today? It's important that whenever real-world things happen, that we actually talk about them, because they really do matter. Next, and related to this topic, we have a study published in Royal Society Open Science that has found no link between violent video game content and aggressive behavior. What a surprise. What's most notable, though, is that the methodology here checks out. The study was conducted on 1,000 14 to 15-year-olds using PEGI ratings as their guideline and seeking information from caregivers regarding their behavior, not having the kids self-report. They did not find a significant correlation between aggressive behavior and playing violent video games, actually as rated by both the US and EU rating systems. Now, it is worth noting that while they did seem very confident in their findings, they do say that video games could be linked with other sorts of antisocial behavior, essentially things like trolling, and they had this to say. We argue that this study speaks to the key question of whether adolescents' violent video game play has a measurable effect on real-world aggressive behavior. On the basis of our evidence, the answer is no. This is not to say that some mechanics and situations in gaming do not foment angry feelings or reactions in players, such as feelings of incompetence, trash talking, or competition. And I think that's very reasonable to say. Personally, I don't think there's any behavioral link in normal people, who of course form the bulk of society, between violent video games and aggression. That said, competitiveness in any medium can lead to antisocial behavior. And then as compared to other things, well, video games and general internet usage could have a bit of that road rage effect, where the depersonalization of the other leads to people behaving in a way that they normally would not. Ultimately, those things are universal problems, they're not domain-specific to video games. The solution to this is, of course, very simple. It's what it always has been. Good parenting. But here's the thing, good parenting, what does that require? That requires responsibility. And do you know what? You cannot get voted into office by standing up on a podium and saying, my friends, we need good parenting. No. You get voted by doing what Sturgeon did, by doing what Diane Abbott did, by saying, we need to fix this problem, we need to save the kids, and I will do it, so vote for me. And that's why you've got to be wary of politicians when they meddle with things like this. It's not normally for pure reasons, and ultimately, parenting. Parenting is the thing that really does fix most of these problems. And unfortunately for us as a species, you can't just fix parenting. That's always going to be a problem that we're going to have to grapple with. But it's best that we're aware that that is really the problem and the solution and work on those terms instead of going around trying to play problem whack-a-mole and, not actually solve the core issue. Okay, with all that serious stuff covered, let's talk about normal gaming news. So, EA are skipping their E3 press event, they're joining Sony in not bothering, and they've said that they're going to host a larger EA Play event. So, instead of doing a presser, they are going to have a 2-day event the weekend before E3, and this event is going to involve live streams with hands-on sessions with their games. What does this mean? Well, you know what? It means that E3 is getting less and less important, but I think there is something a bit extra to this right now. Most major new games are probably being developed for the PlayStation 5 and the next Xbox. Those consoles, of course, have not been announced yet, and that would really make announcing games for them a tad awkward, to say the least. Plus, last generation, well, a number of games were talked about far too early and, well, didn't get released or were released after significant delay. They probably don't want that to happen again. I also think that ideally, they want to be a little bit more ready for this next generation. For whatever reason, it just seemed like the PS4 generation had a bit of a slow start, certainly in terms of its content. As for Sony, well, PlayStation Experience 2018 was cancelled, and they said that they were pulling out of E3 2019, which again pretty much opens them up for a PlayStation Experience this year that discusses their next-gen plans. After all, back in 2013, they announced the PS4 in February with a November release date. Which, again, of course, was something that would make it pretty challenging for the likes of EA to have a large roster of announcements for E3 2019. It's likely that they want to emulate what Nintendo have been able to do over the last few years with their Nintendo Direct presentations, which have been universally well received, very much unlike EA's press events, which were, well, hard to watch, to say the least. Now, having things be shifted away from E3, that really just reflects how we're moving into a bit of a different era. Big press events that get journalists together, they're just not that needed in the modern era, and increasingly, companies seem to want to engage their audiences directly, rather than through a blog post on Kotaku. Again, just look at how many people tune in to Nintendo Direct and how successful Nintendo's public communications have been, especially in creating superfans. Now, with many incumbents opting out, the stage really is set then for Microsoft to dominate the E3 news cycle, and of course, it has also been reported that Microsoft will be discussing their next-gen plans. So yeah, that means the next-gen news cycle is going to kick off very soon indeed. And really, the whole thing's kind of understandable. Major publishers are winding down their current development. We've got new consoles on the way. We're just in that lull before things really pick up again. As a PC gamer, I'm really excited to see the top end of what, say, graphics are kind of permissible by the industry and the economics of it. That will be lifted once a new wave of consoles comes out. Maybe Nvidia will get a bit more competitive, maybe AMD will get a bit more competitive, and that all is going to lead to, better looking games. Not exactly something that's going to lead to better playing games, as I think the last while has taught us, but I mean, hey, at least it's something. Okay, so next up we've got a very positive Nintendo news story. News that literally is a company asking for less money, and that really is an odd thing. So, Nintendo have revenue sharing agreements with a few mobile games companies who make licensed Nintendo titles. This has led to titles like Cyber Agent's Dragalia Lost. Now, it launched with a pretty overbearing RNG monetization system, kind of gacha game style from what I understand, leading to Nintendo telling Cyber Agent to adjust the game to avoid excessive spending. Yes, Nintendo told them to make less money because they felt it was a bad customer experience. This has been confirmed by a Cyber Agent official who said that Nintendo are not interested in making a large amount of money from a single smartphone game, and that if they had managed the game, well, they would have made a lot more money. Nintendo pretty much confirmed this as well. They said that they discuss various things, not just limited to payments in order to deliver a high-quality fun to consumers. And you know what? It's actually lovely to see this amount of commitment to the customer's experience. It shows a great deal of respect, and as the Wall Street Journal pointed out in their coverage, they are leaving a lot of money on the table. Their goal of 10 or 100 billion yen in annual revenue, which is something they're not meeting, is kind of small, especially compared to, say, Sony's Fate Grand Order, which is bringing in more money than their overall target, and that's just one game. So they are leaving a massive amount of money on the table, seemingly down to respecting customers. Now, they do seem to feel that these excessive sort of gacha game mechanics are just not right, and they're fine to hurt their bottom line if it means avoiding them, it seems. Now, I suppose you could also maybe think that it's more possible for Nintendo to convert a phone Nintendo gamer to a Switch Nintendo gamer, and that would mean that prioritizing user experience is more to the core of their business than it would be for Sony, who do not have a similar device, with them having halted Vita production quite recently in Japan. So, yeah, Nintendo do actually gain from providing a good customer experience, but ultimately, I mean, it's just that. They provided a good experience, so people will be more likely to buy a Switch. So even if they have an ulterior motive to not monetize as hard on mobile as they can, it's all pretty in line with what I think customers want. So with that, let's smoothly move on to some Sony news. This is actually still mobile related though, as their PS Remote app has been approved on iOS devices. Now this is actually quite big, bigger than you may think, primarily because Valve's Steam Link was not permitted by Apple. Now, I was initially fairly sure that it was because of what was accessible on Steam Link, because you can hook Steam up to like any EXE, meaning you could run anything, especially things that Apple would not want to be associated with. That very much is less the case, of course, for the far more controlled PlayStation library, but then I remembered that TeamViewer and Chrome Remote both have iOS apps, meaning that, yeah, you could use them to access content that would not be allowed on the iOS store. And I mean, hell, the same even goes for the Safari browser that ships on iOS. So it could actually be that Apple don't like Steam's implementation of Link on iOS from a technical perspective, or that they have had some sort of policy change. I will say that being able to use an iOS device for Steam Link would actually be quite handy, as it is for PS Remote, and when you think about Microsoft's Project xCloud, well, increasingly our ability to stream video is going to erode at the idea of bespoke devices. It really is. I don't think we're there yet, but compare the internet as it was 15 years ago to how it is today, and then think forward 15 years in the future. It's fair to assume we're all going to have over gigabit with under 20 ms ping, at least in cities. I mean, I'm in Belfast, not a tech hub. I have 400 down and 20 ping. So I think a gigabit in 15 years for me is very conservative of an estimate. Now this probably won't impact the next Xbox or the PS5, but I could see this being a massive thing for the PS6 and its equivalent Xbox. I mean, hell, just look at the speed of the latest iPad Pro. That thing benchmarks faster, probably faster than your desktop computer, with a Geekbench score of 18,000, which is the same as an i5 8400K. So perhaps, 7 nanometer progress, maybe another die shrink, could give us phones that are basically outperforming current consoles. So while the market of the next few years, I think, is kind of predictable, the rapid pace of technology is going to make the next 15 years of our industry pretty damn wild, and probably look very different to what we see today. And then finally for today's news, denuvo. It is one of the most hardcore DRM systems out there, and it's actually kind of hard to tell what it does, but it seems like it involves a bunch of live encryption and decryption of game files, plus likely some other stuff. Now, the key takeaway is that it can eat up a lot of your CPU time, which in some more CPU-bound games can lead to large drops in performance. Now, there's a lot more to talk about here, but the current sort of story is that it's hit DMC5 really hard. Users actually found a beta branch on Steam that did not have denuvo. So upon launching that, they found that frame rates were 25% higher. So whatever denuvo was doing, it was knocking a quarter off average frame rates and also leading to less consistent frame timings. Now, this beta branch has since been pulled, but users can still download it through the Steam console, but it's probably only a matter of time before Capcom pull it. A cracked version of DMC5, though, is already out there, and it's safe to say that due to denuvo, the cracked version is objectively the superior version of the game, which is an insane state of affairs. Without denuvo, there would be less of a reason to pirate that game, and it's not like denuvo was able to prevent people from cracking it, as the game quite obviously has been cracked. On the whole, it seems like a strange, pointless battle. At the end of the day, piracy is a service problem. Gaben was right. Most people would rather just buy the game in Steam, but the presence of denuvo gives them a very good reason not to, and that should be a bit of a cautionary tale for companies. So there you go, that is it for today's news recap. Man, there's a lot of stuff. I did not plan on going on a big tangent that involved politics stuff, and to be really clear, not taking any left-right side in this. It is a general, suspicion of government, which I think is really good for everyone to have, because hey, politicians, right? They have incentives. They're going to do what makes the most sense to them, and you know what? That does not always line up with the best policy ever. So I think it's really important to talk about those things. And at the end of the day, it may seem like I'm just being like, oh, it'll hurt our video. We won't get as fun video games. Well, at the end of the day, books have done a lot for humans. Films and TV will as well, and gaming is just the next form of expression after that. And if we let it, if we let gaming be the one that's clamped down on, guess what? The thing that comes after gaming, if there is one, that's going to be clamped down upon as well, and even harder. And we don't want to set bad precedents, let's just say that. So, that's it for today's news. Let me know what you thought about the topics discussed down below in those comments, and be sure to sub to the channel because we have so much content coming out this week. Thank you very much for watching, and with that, I'll see you next time.